As I look into the future, I think it's always good to remember that, not everybody changes the world. In fact, very small groups, groups of people have actually brought major changes in the world.
One thing that we must appreciate is that we have come from a situation where we were persuading people, trying to convince them that women's rights are human rights. Everybody knows that. The women know it, the girls know it, the boys know, and the men know.
There was a major gap everywhere, in government, in civil society organizations, in NGOs, and it became an important perspective. Became an important perspective. There were gender studies before that, there were women's studies, and it had been realized that women were absent.
Making sure that we have gender disaggregated data in all our walks of life at national level and now at county level is fully realized.
How the state embeds the idea of masculinity to the point where even women who participate in statehood actually take up roles and behave as men to be seen to be as leaders. But at least I can trace situations where our contribution has led to the currently relatively favorable atmosphere for women leadership and leadership of other gender groups.
People traditionally are guided by mythic thinking. And when it is mythic thinking, it is belief. So dismantling those beliefs, challenging those beliefs, and even programming in such a way that you overcome them and people can see the results, that it is just a mythical thinking was quite important to overcome.
I think in 1991, 1990, I'm not sure exactly which day, but it's either of the two. We had a 3-week training on gender training in Lake Baringo. And there were quite a number of us, men and women. Odieke, I remember, was there. I know Waita was not there. He was my student. He had not gotten into this. Machete was there. Oscar Buta was there. There was another one who was head of the Freedom from Hunger organization. It was called Bogwa. Miriam Gachago was there. I think there were quite a number of us. I'm trying to remember whether Professor Kimani was there. But we had a team that actually got trained on gender to become trainers of trainers. And we were trained by Code University. And this was, the lady from Code University and others were part of the development of the framework, the gender. It's called the Harvard Model framework, and they later also developed others. So that was a very academic, kind of training, trying to understand the gender, trying to see how you use case studies, trying to think about participatory methods. And most of us who were from the university and also from civil society groups, we were not really very familiar with these particular terms. But I think for me that was the foundation for this particular training, gender training. And then later on we had another training, I think a year later, in Nyeri, where we had quite a number of people. By the way, at that time, Odieke was actually in the ministry, in a senior position in planning. And we had a few other people that also joined us. And I think we had also people like Professor Kimani, who also joined us, and Gitasho, I think, Miriam Gachago, and I think a few others. So that training was now a kind of a practical experience of how to use the methodologies for gender training. I'm going back to this because gender training has not most people who talk about gender training, they don't know what they're talking about. I think there's a theory around the methodologies you use, like participatory methods. There's a theory around the frameworks that have been created by Sarah Longwe, the Harvard model, and there's also a feminist model, which by the way was done by Machete and myself. I think I forgot, to bring it here, but I think for the feminist model was actually based on the kind of training we were doing. We were there until around 1996. Then in 1996, the team decided that it was time that we actually established an organization. So Machete and I actually started that process. And, we needed to get out of Femnet as a program to actually establish a proper institutional framework for growing the gender training. Gender training and not only training, go beyond training others or training other institutions to creating an institution that is bigger and that is actually more focused on gender equality, not just through training, but implementation of other programs. But we did not have anything else or funders or anything. But we started, I forgot Sarah Wajohi. She passed on later. Sarah Wajohi, actually, myself and Machete started the organization CCGD with the help of course, Professor Advocacy, who actually also joined the team in starting that organization, and Peter Odieki, who was also in government, and who was also advising us on the best way, to start the organization, because this was during the time of Moi era. So, and I know, for instance, Machete and I could not have our names on the forms that were filling for registration, because people are being investigated to, if whether they have radical ideas. Machete was teaching at KU at the time, soon after that, or around the same time. But Peter Odieki and Eda Kashukia were acceptable to government. I forget who the third person was, and they were the ones who registered the organization. And it's very good to see how the people who started continued, up to today.
Now we started redefining ourselves, redefining the center, coming up with our vision, and mission, and bringing together other people now as members of the center with a common goal then. So from that time, I have trained for the center for a long time, even before I became a member. And I remember one of the things that we were focusing on were institutions. We were working with the ministries, we were working with NGOs, and I cannot even say where we did not go in Kenya and out of Kenya to train.
I happened now to be in the Ministry of Planning, where I was one of those officers who were in charge of data analysis. So I began working closely with the Women's Bureau in the Ministry of Culture. That was the focal point for gender issues in government. We began working with the Women Bureau at the Ministry of Social Services on trying to get gender disaggregated data, to make sure that we have gender disaggregated data in government.
At the time, there was a big gap. Gender, especially in the beginning of the 90s, because this is when gender language became mainstream, and gender awareness started catching up, and that's why they initially focused on gender training. And there was a major gap everywhere, in government, in civil society organizations, in NGOs, and it became an important perspective. Became an important perspective. There were gender studies before that. There were women studies, and it had been realized that women were absent in research. They were absent as they were just subjects of research, but not objects of research. They were absent. They were not even recognized because gender-blind language was used in policy documents, in programs. And there had become a realization that women's perspectives were ignored. Those of girls later became the agenda for sensitization about especially girls' education also became an important issue, especially in Beijing, and was one of the action points to promote equality and education for girls.
We started largely as a sensitization group. Why sensitization? Because the challenge then was people still don't know the gender angle. They are more steeped into the women in development angle. So they have to be sensitized. We had to deal with sensitization because we knew concepts like empowerment are concepts that they sound lofty. But sometimes the challenge is not in why they sound lofty. The challenge is in how do you make practical gains out of a concept that somebody cannot hold tangible. So our work was to break down, like, women's empowerment has nothing to do with women running down men. Women's empowerment has everything to do with a woman having her own space, discretionary space, in terms of economics, in terms of voice, in terms of choices, in terms of prestige, in terms of self-image, all these things. And that gave us a lot of work.
By that time, we were also conscious of gender-aware analysis. And we were actually doing that before becoming trainers. We were doing that within Kenya Oral Literature Association. And then I found, that the secretary, Machete, when I was chair, that we were able to work together very, very well. But you see, something happens when you do research. Because if you do research, particularly qualitative research, you will find information that challenges the situation in which you are working in. If you listen carefully, to this, that research. But then also, both of us coming from academia, he was teaching in the KU when he finished his master's at the University of Nairobi. He was teaching in KU. And, once you get a bit of consciousness, that makes you begin to, and that consciousness raising comes actually through that kind of analysis. It doesn't have to be like when you are being trained. When you are being trained, you become conscious of what is happening around you. As a woman, or even we become conscious that as a man, I should not have said that because it is anti-women, because we are also using tools. So, and the gender training itself, helped us to, and I don't know, sometimes I try to talk about this even in the, in the university. The tools that you use that help you to do the analysis and to understand that actually you may not even blame these men because that is the way they are brought up. You look at the media, you look at what happens in the church, publications, just documenting, what happens. And not only just doing research and then keeping it in the store, documenting, publishing, and making sure that the information goes to the public, because then you reach more people. I think that was very important. The policy, focus on policy was very important. And I think even today, when, we talk about, when we talk about policies, I still go back to the learning that we had, in negotiating and working with the women parliamentarians and so on, and learning that Policy is very important. You can train people, but when the policies when you change policies and then you follow them with, trying to ensure their implementation, then you reach more people.
At least a big number of the women were influenced by the activities of the center through the work of people like Wajiko Kabira, people like even Martha Karua, and Phoebe Asio, all those people, including judges like Dungo, all these people, we used to be with them in articulating the position and the role of women in participation in politics and other sectors of the society. So that is an area which the center did particularly well in bringing in more and more women, and that is why now we have, if you look between that time and now, if we use indicators which are there, we can say we have made a great strides in terms of bringing in women into politics. That time there were very few. You could only probably find the mother and one more woman like Phoebe Asio, Grace Okot. Then that's the whole, for the whole country. These days we really have a very good display of gender and direction of development in women participation. Again, the input of the center was significant, through also the delegation to Wajiko Kabira, who was also part of the constitutional making team. The work which the center was doing became an input into the new constitution in defining certain sectors of that new constitution, which have become critical today in national development, in areas of various sections of the constitution, including the 2/3 gender rule. That is how it emerged. The center had a role of a contribution to that critical element which we find today. So the participation of girls and women in education, in politics, in national affairs is a great achievement from the proposals and the advocacy that the Collaborative Center for Gender and Development has been doing over the years.
The focus on the girl child became a national agenda. The establishment of gender desks. Of course, this has to be seen together with what was happening at the international level, because the decisions of Beijing and the thematic areas within the Beijing Platform for Action were cascaded down to all areas, at all levels, and even civil society organizations, institutions, and NGOs. It became an agenda too, and influence programs within every sector, and also mainstreaming gender within the education sector, because as you influence through training, we would also be involved, some of us, in drafting policy, working with these organizations in order to do policy documents that are gender inclusive, gender sensitive, looking at everything from the programs from a gender lens.
Some of the policies that CCGD may have contributed to, not singly but also in collaboration with other organizations, were policies that ensured that there was some fairness in education sector. For instance, the whole idea of having points lowered, for female admissions into the university. CCGD may not have been the only organization, but we added our voice to the call for that, for the simple reason that early 1990s, the percentage of women joining our university, which was only University of Nairobi and Moi University and KU, was just 22, 23 thereabout. The rest were men. And the strict adherence to a particular set of cut-off point meant clearly that we were ignoring some of the mitigating circumstances that make girls find it a lot harder to attain certain levels. And I remember that time, one of the influences that CCGD, alongside other organizations, did was to make the government realize that at some point you have to adopt affirmative action even in education by lowering even the cutoff points. And it worked. The complaint that we had were the usual masculine complaint, oh no, they are not fit, that kind of thing. They won't make it and all that. But then after years, they are proven wrong. So in terms of policy, CCGD did contribute alongside other interested parties in making sure that certain government policies favor the idea of gender equality.
But what the center has been doing, even campaigning for the child care centers, so that the women can be able to release themselves from the children, but also negotiating with both the county and the national government to ensure that there are infrastructures that are supporting women, so that they have some time to themselves, or they can do things faster, and they can be able to get time to do other things.
When the governor of Kajiado came to Ngong Market and saw what we were doing, having a place for women traders to have a child care in a working place, so that one can come back, breastfeed and go to continue doing our work. The governor did say that kumbe it is something which can be done. You mean such a simple thing, they had never thought about it. Imagine if at such a senior level somebody can convey that kind of appreciation. Imagine as a next thing we are going to see is a policy for the county government so that they replicate it all over.
We started thinking about, how to retell the stories, how to retell the stories, and how to critique. And Milton Obote was there also. This Obote was also part of that, and also Waita. Waita was also my student. I supervised his master's thesis. So with this organization, we had already begun actually talking about the last of the August. This is from publication from Kenya Oral Literature Association. And the last of the August, I think they are short stories. We were telling stories, but telling them differently. Meaning, trying to begin to tell the stories from the women's point of view and from girls' point of view, to make sure that we begin changing the images of women in oral literature. My PhD was in Gikuyu oral literature, so which I graduated in 1994. But going through the stories, you could tell how the stories themselves had potential for transforming, women's lives. But that potential was very hidden in the broader expectation of society on what the stories should be, and the women told them according to the expectations of the society. So the last of the August, I think this was edited by Jacqueline Odur. She was also a committee member for Kenya Oral Literature Association. This other one, today somebody on LinkedIn said she had read my story, the Good Witch of Kiaridaini. Like the rewriting the stories of Kisi people, when they're talking about the witches, the women as witches, you revert it and actually tell the story of how beautiful older women are, not translate, making them witches.
In terms of challenges, the first challenge is even acceptance of what the center was doing. Yes. When you move to the field, you move to institutions, and you are talking about gender equality, gender equity. Of course, in a society where that was a new notion, a society used to traditional gender perceptions in terms of gender roles, that was a great challenge. Because traditionally people traditionally are guided by mythic thinking. And when it is mythic thinking, it is belief. So dismantling those beliefs, challenging those beliefs, and even programming in such a way that you overcome them and people can see the results, that it is just a mythical thinking was quite important to overcome. And again, this we were able to overcome through proper analysis of issues and also documentation, and also in a way also preaching gender equity as a gospel, as an ideological, at an ideological level.
The other thing is the programming itself, because again, the center has also to abide with where the donors' programming is. And so sometimes they may start a project or a program, and sometimes we find it cannot go far because then the donors have already withdrawn. And of course, the political environment, we know what happened with the USID. And of course, it affects the center because there were programs on the ground. You have not completed the project cycle, but all of a sudden, things happen, and the financier has to withdraw. So those are the issues. We need the money also to support the institution. There are programs that allow for that administratively, but the others where the center has to keep up saving for that kind of support and to keep on going.
Just like a child who grows, stumbles, and you tell them stand and pick up, there are many lessons we have to learn in terms of, are we on the right path? Are we using the right modules? One of the things we found many organizations and communities resistant to was the whole idea of adoption of gender frameworks. So we would go somewhere and say, we are now using the Harvard Gender Analysis Framework. And the question is, you mean there are no indigenous analysis frameworks? Part of it had to do with ignorance, but part of it had also to do with us not tailoring our training modules to suit the context. That was a great challenge that we had to really dig through. How do you tailor your training modules so that they fit context and they generate, maximum impact as you really intend? That was a major issue.
Okay, as I look into the future, I think it's always good to remember that, not everybody changes the world. In fact, very small groups, groups of people have actually brought major changes in the world. And I think when we think about the things that I've been talking about, and the major contribution of CCGD to the way we look at gender equality and promote gender equality in this country and also in the region, and the people that we have sent out there who have gone through CCGD, and the kind of leadership that has been offered by both the board and also by the director, Machete. I think we have a long way to go, and this organization can actually celebrate 100 years. So you still have 70 years to go, because I think there are many changes that we still need. I think there is hope that gender equality is continue being an issue that we should be able to address in its various facets. And I believe that the young people today are also actually facing the challenges to a certain extent that women face in the past, and men as well. But also, they have also been the product in a certain way of the struggles that people have been, the rest of their parents, the older generation has been going through. But I believe that the future leadership of this country and Africa in general, I think there's a lot of hope in it. We can make a difference as CCGD. We have made a difference in the past. We can continue making a difference. We can contribute to transforming this society. But that one now, we are leaving it up to you, the younger generation. I think you must develop the tools, Now with the AI, it can write what you want for you. But then you have to read it to know whether that is what you are looking for. You have the tools that can help you reach very many people, which we did not have. And I believe that CCGD will continue actually pursuing the issues of gender equality and having an impact not just in Kenya, in our region, and also in the continent.
One thing that we must appreciate is that we have come from a situation where we were persuading people and trying to negotiate with the people, trying to convince them that women's rights are human rights. Everybody knows that. The women know it, the girls know it, the boys know, and the men know. But what we need now to focus on at this point in time as leaders, let's call all stakeholders who are really interested and focused on having gender equity and equality, especially in support of the Sustainable Development Goals.
CCGD has come a long way in that we now have a structure on how we relate and how we fundraise and how we work. One can say that over time, I can say that we now have built, over time, we now have built confidence among the people we collaborate with, both locally and internationally.
And I'm disappointed that cases of femicide are still on the rise, that gender violence is still on the rise. What I can't say for sure is whether they are on the rise or is the reporting which is on the rise. Because if it's the reporting which is on the rise, then that's a positive element. Though none should be happening. But the fact that many people are able to do that, that would be taken as true. But definitely the voice of CCGD is there in ensuring that the pressure actually continued through the members of parliament. And Wanjiku has been very active with this, by the way. This has been our greatest effort. So that the overall governance, where we have an affirmative action place, where we want to look at women's leadership as leadership, not as women's leadership.